Despite the long hours, poor rations, and constant threat of beatings, one would have been lucky to work in one of Treblinka's non-extermination area units, especially when one considers the alternatives, that being death, or arguably even worse, facilitating death. Such was the fate of the so-called Totenjuden, or the Jews of Death. Referring to those who worked in the upper camp of Treblinka, or the extermination area, these men worked in and around the gas chambers and the burial pits. Working in the dark, secret heart of the camp, these men saw into the nightmare of what an extermination camp truly was, and were witness to the pain and suffering of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Perhaps the worst of these roles were the men who worked in and around the gas chambers, whether it be the men who removed the bodies of their murdered kindred from the fake shower rooms, or the men tasked with cleaning the blood, excrement, and vomit that would accumulate after every gassing. For these men, the working conditions were, unsurprisingly, appalling, especially when Treblinka was at peak operation. Immediately after the final bodies had been cleared, the chambers would then have to be cleaned with ruthless efficiency, as the next group of victims awaited their turn for their showers. While the chambers were being cleaned, the other gas chamber operatives took the bodies of the dead and carried them to the edge of the pits. The bodies would later be buried. 2 men would normally haul men's bodies in stretchers, or sling women, children, and perhaps, most harrowing of all, babies over their shoulders. Once near the pits, the dead Jews would then undergo one last violation of their dignity, as the so-called dentist team would begin to harvest their corpses. This team, comprised of roughly 20 men, were forced to use pliers and other tools to extract gold and platinum from the recently murdered victim's teeth. Once a corpse had been sufficiently pilfered of any remaining value to the SS, the dentists would signal to the burial detail team, who would then arrange the corpses of the fallen into Treblinka's gaping burial pits. Once arranged, the infamous digger from Treblinka 1 would then cover the bodies with sand and silt. Following SS Chief Heinrich Himmler's visit in early 1943, and the consequent implementation of Action 1005, these pits were exhumed, and the bodies burned. As a result, the extermination area teams were expanded, but the exact details of such will be covered later in the documentary, as part of an investigation on Action 1005. Unsurprisingly, suicide rates in Treblinka's upper camp were staggering. Chiel Rajchmann, who was forced to work in the extermination area, spoke of his first morning waking up in the barracks. "I awake with a headache. I see opposite me a man hanging. I point this out to my neighbour, who points in another direction. 2 more men are hanging. Here, it is nothing new. He tells me that today less people than usual hang themselves, and that every morning they remove those from the hut who had hanged themselves during the night. I look at those hanging, and am jealous of the peace they now know." Another inmate, called Abraham Lindweischer, attempted suicide after he had found that he had been assigned to the dentist team, being forced to extract gold fillings from the mouths of the dead. He testified at the Eichmann trial on how he was prevented from going through with his suicide attempt. "After I was informed of my job, I couldn't stand it. I tried to commit suicide. I was already hanging from the belt, and then a bearded Jew took me down. I don't know his name. He began lecturing me and said that although the work we were doing was despicable, not only would we have to do it, but we would have to cope with it. We would have to make an effort so that at least someone would remain who could tell everyone else what was going on here, and that was my job. And because I had an easy work, I could endure and be of help to others." What is most remarkable about Lindweischer's testimony is that he admitted to having a easy job. Given that his task involved ripping the teeth out of his recently dead kin, the fact that he considered it easy just shows how awful the other roles in the extermination area must have been. Indeed, Lindweischer's job did not demand as much physical stress on the body, but presumably just as much mental pain. The Treblinka SS, who were initially tolerant of such instances, rationalising that it was inevitable, eventually tired of losing useful workers. Therefore, at the beginning of 1943, Franz Stangl authorised the creation of a night watch team comprised of 2 men. These men would be exempt from working during the day, instead having to patrol the barracks at night, to make sure that their brethren were not attempting suicide. Although this team did lead to a reduction in suicides, their presence ultimately couldn't eradicate the issue, leading to the dissolution of their jobs and eventually their execution. It is interesting to note that until mid-February 1943, women were not present at all in the upper camp of Treblinka, only having representation in the lower camp, particularly in the sorting sheds. This is unsurprising, given that the jobs in the upper camp were ones that usually demanded great physical strength and endurance, naturally lending itself towards men. However, following a typhus epidemic in the January and February of 1943, which killed a large number of male prisoners in the upper camp, the SS decided to establish a laundry unit in the extermination area. This was done so that the workers could change in and out of their blood and excrement-infested clothing. Therefore, a laundry and living barracks were erected, which were staffed entirely by women, who had been selected from the lower camp and from recent transports. While women were not at the forefront of the Jewish Sonderkommando units in the Aktion Reinhard death camps, their presence was notable, especially as cooks, laundrywomen, seamstresses, and of course in the sorting sheds.